A breathtaking concert turns unforgettable when Jimin suddenly does something to Jungkook that leaves everyone speechless and changes everything between them. The entire stadium screamed when Jimin dropped to his knees in front of Jungkook. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Not the dancers surrounding them beneath a storm of golden confetti, not the musicians frozen behind their instruments, not even Jungkook, whose microphone slipped from his fingers and struck the stage with a sharp metallic crack. Then the audience erupted. The sound was so enormous that the floor seemed to tremble beneath their shoes. Jungkook stared at Jimin as though he had forgotten where he was. The stage had been designed to look like another world. Towering LED walls painted with silver galaxies, hundreds of moving lights slicing through artificial fog, enormous flames erupting at the edge of the runway, and thousands of tiny screens in the audience glowing like stars. Everything about the concert had been planned to perfection. Every movement, every camera angle, every note, every breath. But Jimin had just destroyed the script. He slowly rose from the stage, his chest rising and falling beneath the black jacket glittering under the spotlights. Jungkook grabbed his wrist. "What are you doing?" Jimin looked at him. For a moment, the roaring stadium disappeared. There were only the two of them. Jimin's expression was strangely calm. "Something I should have done a long time ago." Jungkook's eyes widened. The nearest camera captured every second. Millions would see it later. But nobody in that stadium understood what Jimin had just done. Not yet. Jimin reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Jungkook instinctively stepped backward. "Jimin." A small black box appeared in Jimin's hand. The crowd screamed again. Jungkook's face drained of color. "No." Jimin smiled faintly. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" Jimin opened the box. Inside was an old silver key. The kind that belonged to a lock nobody used anymore. Jungkook stared at it. His lips parted. The expression on his face changed so quickly that the camera operator almost missed it. Shock, fear, recognition, and finally something painfully close to grief. "You kept it," Jungkook whispered. Jimin nodded. "I promised I would." The music had stopped completely. The audience was still making noise, but somewhere beyond the stage lights, the production team had realized something was wrong. A stage manager shouted into his headset, "Cut camera 3, cut it now." But it was already too late. The image had been transmitted to every giant screen in the stadium. Jimin held the key between 2 fingers. "This belonged to the room where we made our promise." Jungkook swallowed. "Don't. I have to." "Not here." Jimin's smile disappeared. "Then where?" Jungkook had no answer. Because both of them knew there was no safe place anymore. 8 years earlier, they had stood in a deserted rehearsal building at 2 in the morning. They had been younger then. More reckless. More certain that promises made in darkness could survive daylight. Jimin had found the key inside an old drawer. Jungkook had laughed when he saw it. "What does it open?" "I don't know." "Then why keep it?" "Because someday we'll find out." Jungkook had looked at him for several seconds before taking the key. "Fine." He had placed it inside Jimin's palm. "You keep it." "Why me?" "Because you remember things better than I do." Jimin had smiled. Neither of them knew that years later, the key would become the symbol of everything they had failed to say. The stadium lights suddenly changed. The enormous screens behind them went black. A single sentence appeared. "You promised you would come back." Jungkook stopped breathing. Jimin looked toward the screen. The audience fell strangely quiet. Someone in the production booth whispered, "That wasn't in the program." Jungkook turned toward Jimin. "You did this." Jimin shook his head. "No." Another sentence appeared. *8 years, 1 secret, 1 locked room. The crowd began murmuring. Jungkook's fingers tightened around Jimin's wrist. Who has access to the screens? I don't know. You're lying. I'm not. The screen flickered. Then an old photograph appeared. It showed two young men standing outside an abandoned rehearsal building. Jimin recognized it immediately. Jungkook did too. The audience couldn't hear what they whispered to each other, but they could see their faces. And for the first time that night, the grandeur of the concert no longer mattered. The flames, the lights, the choreography, the thousands of screaming fans. Everything became background noise. Because someone had just exposed a secret neither Jimin nor Jungkook had ever intended to reveal. Jimin looked at Jungkook. We need to leave. Jungkook shook his head. If we leave now, everyone will know something happened. They already know. A sharp crack came from backstage. The screens went dark. The stadium plunged into darkness. Someone screamed. Jimin immediately reached for Jungkook. Stay with me. I am. A second explosion of sound came from behind the stage. Emergency lights flickered red. Security personnel rushed onto the runway. Jungkook felt Jimin's fingers tighten around his. Then someone shouted from backstage. Don't let them reach the dressing rooms. Jungkook froze. Jimin looked at him. They're looking for us. And suddenly the concert was no longer a concert. It was a trap. The two of them ran. They disappeared through the curtain as thousands of confused voices followed them. Behind the stage, the air smelled of smoke, hot metal and artificial fog. Technicians scattered. Dancers shouted questions. Security guards blocked corridors. Jimin pulled Jungkook toward a narrow service hallway. Where are we going? The old storage room. Why? Because that's where the key belongs. Jungkook stopped. Jimin nearly collided with him. Jungkook, you said we should never go back. I know. Then why are you taking me there? Jimin looked at him. Because beneath the fear in his eyes was something else. Determination. I found out who locked that door. Jungkook's expression changed. Who? Jimin didn't answer. Instead, he whispered 4 words. Someone we both trusted. The corridor lights flickered. Footsteps echoed somewhere behind them. Jungkook looked over his shoulder. Nobody was there. Yet, he turned back. Tell me. Jimin's eyes filled with a sadness Jungkook hadn't seen in years. It was never an accident. The footsteps grew louder. Jimin grabbed his hand again. And tonight we're finally going to find out why. They reached the storage room. Jimin pulled out the silver key. The old lock was still there. Rust covered its edges. Jungkook stared at it. For 8 years he had tried to forget that room existed. He had buried the memories beneath rehearsals, schedules, interviews, applause, sleepless nights, and everything else that kept him moving. But memory had never truly disappeared. It had simply waited. Jimin inserted the key. Click. The lock opened. Jungkook closed his eyes. The door creaked inward. Cold air escaped from the darkness. Inside, nothing had changed. The old wooden table. The broken chair. The faded posters. And on the wall, scratched into the paint with something sharp, were 2 initials. J. Jungkook stepped closer. His breathing became unsteady. You knew? Jimin nodded. I found the room 6 months ago. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. Of what? Jimin looked at him. That you'd remember. Jungkook stared at him. Then the lights inside the room came on. A small projector activated automatically. A video appeared on the wall. The image was old. Grainy. But unmistakable. Two younger versions of themselves stood in the same room. Jungkook heard his younger voice. "If something happens, promise you'll come back." Young Jimin laughed. "Nothing is going to happen. Promise." A pause. Then Jimin answered, "I promise." The video continued. A third person entered the frame. Jungkook's eyes widened. He knew that person. Someone he had trusted. Someone who had been beside them during the years when everything changed. The video stopped. A message appeared. "Now you know who lied." Jungkook's face hardened. "Who sent this?" Jimin shook his head. "I don't know. You expect me to believe that. I expect you to understand that I've been trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Jimin stepped closer. "From the truth." Jungkook laughed bitterly. "I'm tired of being protected." The words hung between them. Jimin's expression broke. "I know. You disappeared when I needed you. I know. You stopped answering my calls. I know. You told me it was better if we stayed apart. I know." Jungkook's voice cracked. "Then why did you come back?" Jimin looked down. "Because I never left." Jungkook stared at him. "What does that mean?" Jimin reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded photograph. He handed it over. Jungkook opened it. His face changed. It was a photograph of the two of them, taken only weeks after the night in the old room. On the back, someone had written a sentence. "He didn't betray you, he was made to look like he did." Jungkook's hands began to shake. "Who wrote this?" Jimin whispered, "I did." Jungkook looked up. "You. I found out the truth too late." "What truth?" Jimin took a breath. "The person who separated us didn't do it because they hated us." "Then why?" "Because someone threatened them." Jungkook stared at him. "Who?" Jimin hesitated. And in that hesitation, Jungkook understood that the answer was worse than anything he had imagined. "Do you know?" Jimin's eyes filled with tears. "Yes. Tell me." "I can't." "Jimin, I can't." "After everything tonight, you still won't tell me." Jimin closed his eyes. "I was told that if I ever told you, you would lose everything." Jungkook stepped closer. "I don't care." "You will." "I don't care." The shout echoed through the room. Jimin flinched. Jungkook immediately regretted it. His voice softened. "I've already lost 8 years." Jimin looked at him. "I know." "No, you don't." Jungkook wiped his eyes. "You don't know what it felt like to believe you hated me." Jimin's lips trembled. "I never hated you." "Then why did you make me believe it?" "Because I loved you." Silence. Absolute silence. Jungkook stopped moving. Jimin seemed almost surprised that he had finally said it. The words remained suspended between them. Neither dared to touch them. Outside the room, distant alarms continued to sound. But inside, everything was still. Jungkook whispered, "Say it again." Jimin looked at him. "I loved you." Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. "Past tense." Jimin shook his head. "No." A tear slipped down his cheek. "Present tense." Jungkook looked away. For years he had imagined hearing those words. He had imagined shouting, fighting, demanding answers. Instead, he found himself unable to speak. Jimin stepped closer. "I changed the way I dressed tonight because I knew you'd notice." Jungkook gave a broken laugh. "That's what this was about." "No." Jimin smiled through his tears. "It was about reminding you of the first night we met." Jungkook looked at his jacket. Black, silver stitching. A tiny white thread near the collar. exactly like the jacket Jimin had worn 8 years ago. You remembered. I remember everything. Jungkook lowered his head. So do I. For the first time that night, Jimin reached for him without fear. Their hands met. Neither pulled away. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. Jungkook looked toward the door. Someone's coming. Jimin nodded. The door opened. A security officer stood there. But his expression was wrong. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the projector. Then he smiled. You found it. Jungkook stepped in front of Jimin. Who are you? The man closed the door behind him. Someone who has been waiting 8 years for you to open that lock. Jimin's face went pale. You. The man smiled. You finally remembered. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Who is he? Jimin whispered the name. And Jungkook realized why the past had always felt incomplete. The man had been there that night. He had seen everything. He had known the truth. And he had been waiting all these years for the key to return. But before he could say another word, the lights went out again. Jimin grabbed Jungkook's hand. This time, neither of them hesitated. They ran through the darkness. Not because they were afraid of what waited ahead, but because, after 8 years of running from the past, they had finally decided to face it together. The concert outside had ended. The stadium was emptying. Thousands of lights were disappearing one by one. Yet inside the old building, 2 people walked side by side through a corridor filled with memories. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Whatever happens next. Jimin waited. Don't disappear again. Jimin squeezed his hand. I won't. Promise. Jimin smiled. This time I won't need a key to prove it. They reached the exit. Morning light spilled through the doorway. For the first time in years, neither of them looked backward. The world outside would ask questions. The concert footage would spread. People would analyze every gesture, every glance, every second Jimin had dropped to his knees beneath the lights. They would create theories. They would search for explanations. But none of them would know the truth. The truth was much simpler. The most spectacular moment of the concert had never been the fireworks. It had never been the flames. It had never been the thousands of lights illuminating the sky. It had been the moment Jimin reached for Jungkook's hand after 8 years of believing he had lost him. And this time Jungkook held on. Not because the past had been erased. Not because every secret had been solved. But because some promises survive even the longest silence. And as the first sunlight touched their faces, Jimin whispered the words he had been too afraid to say for 8 years. I came back. Jungkook looked at him. I know. Then they walked forward together, leaving the locked room behind them, not because its secrets no longer mattered, but because neither of them was willing to let those secrets decide the rest of their lives. The old silver key remained in Jimin's pocket. The door remained open. And somewhere behind them, deep inside the abandoned building, the projector continued to glow against the empty wall. One final sentence appeared on the screen, the morning after. By sunrise, the concert had become a rumor. By 8 in the morning, it had become a headline. And by 9, the entire city seemed to be talking about the moment Jimin had dropped to his knees in front of Jungkook, beneath a rain of golden confetti. Jungkook sat alone in the back seat of the van, watching the city pass through the tinted window. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages. Missed calls. Notifications. Clips. Comments. Questions. He turned the phone face down. Across from him, Jimin was staring at the floor. Neither had spoken for almost 20 minutes. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavier than that. It carried 8 years inside it. Finally, Jungkook broke it. Did you sleep? Jimin shook his head. No, me neither. Another silence. The driver glanced at them through the mirror, but wisely said nothing. Jungkook leaned his head against the window. The glass was cold against his temple. He could still hear the stadium. The screaming. The music. The sudden silence. Most of all, he could still remember Jimin saying those words. I loved you. Present tense. Jungkook closed his eyes. He had spent years convincing himself that hearing those words would heal everything. It hadn't. It had only made the wound visible again. Jimin. Why now? Jimin looked up. Why did you wait 8 years? Jimin's fingers tightened around the silver key in his pocket. Because I was scared. Of me. No. Then what? Of what would happen if you knew the truths. Jungkook turned toward him. You keep saying that. Because it's true. You said someone threatened you. They did. Who? Jimin looked toward the window. I'll tell you. When I know you're safe. Jungkook gave a quiet, humorless laugh. Do you hear yourself? I do. You just told me you love me, then you're telling me you still don't trust me with the truth. Jimin's eyes lowered. I trust you. Then trust me enough to decide what I can handle. That sentence hurt more than anger would have. Jimin slowly nodded. You're right. The van stopped outside the hotel. Before either could move, the driver spoke. There are reporters outside. Jungkook sighed. Of course there are. Jimin looked at him. We can go through the back. No. Jimin frowned. No. Jungkook opened the door. I'm tired of hiding. The moment they stepped outside, cameras exploded around them. Jungkook. Jimin. Was the proposal real? Are you two dating? What happened on stage last night? Who was the person in the video? Was the old footage authentic? The questions came faster than they could answer. Jungkook stopped. Jimin immediately looked at him. For one brief second, they simply stood there. Then Jungkook reached out. He didn't grab Jimin's hand. He merely touched his wrist. A small gesture, but enough to quiet the chaos inside his own mind. Not here, Jimin whispered. Jungkook nodded. They walked inside. Behind them, cameras continued flashing. Neither noticed the man standing across the street. He wore a grey coat. His face remained hidden beneath a dark cap. But he was holding an old photograph. The same photograph Jimin had shown Jungkook. He stared at it for several seconds. Then he folded it carefully. Finally, he murmured. Inside the hotel, the management team was waiting. The room was tense. People spoke simultaneously. Phones rang. Laptops were open. Someone was already displaying social media trends on a giant screen. Jungkook looked at the screen. Their names were everywhere. Jimin walked toward the table. What happened to the concert footage? One manager hesitated. Most of it has been removed. Most. The unauthorized clips are still circulating. And the old video. Silence. Jungkook looked around. Answer him. The manager swallowed. We're trying to determine where it came from. Jimin's expression hardened. It didn't come from our production system. We know. Then someone deliberately inserted it. Yes. Who had access? We're investigating. Jungkook leaned against the table. Did anyone access the old storage server? The manager looked at him. No. Jungkook frowned. That isn't possible. Why? Because the video was stored there. Everyone looked at him. Jimin slowly turned. You knew? Jungkook nodded. I remembered something. What? The night we recorded that video, there was another camera. Jimin's face changed. I thought it was broken. So did I. Where was it? Jungkook looked toward the ceiling. Above the door. Jimin stared at him. Neither spoke. Then Jimin whispered, someone was recording us. The room became completely silent. One of the managers closed the laptop. Maybe you should both leave this to security. No, Jungkook said. The firmness in his voice surprised everyone. This is about us. Jimin looked at him. And if someone has been manipulating our lives for 8 years, I want to know why. Jimin's eyes softened. For the first time that morning, he smiled. It was smaller. Almost invisible. But Jungkook noticed. He always noticed. Later that afternoon, they returned to the old rehearsal building. They went without staff. Without security. Without telling anyone. The building looked different in daylight. Less frightening. More pathetic. Broken windows reflected the pale sky. Dust covered the corridor. Old posters hung from the walls like ghosts. Jimin walked slowly. Jungkook followed. You remember this place. Every inch. Jimin touched the wall. I used to hide here when I was upset. Jungkook smiled faintly. You always hid behind that door. You noticed. I noticed everything about you. Jimin stopped. Jungkook immediately looked away. I mean, I know what you meant. They continued walking. The storage room was still open. The projector was gone. The wall remained marked with the initials. Jimin approached them. His fingertips traced the scratched letters. Do you remember what we said that night? Jungkook stood beside him. You said you wanted to leave. I did. You said you hated everyone. I was 17. You were dramatic. You weren't. Jungkook laughed. It was the first genuine laugh between them in years. Jimin smiled. Then his expression slowly faded. I didn't actually want to leave. Jungkook looked at him. I know. I wanted someone to ask me to stay. I did. You did. Jimin looked down. But I was too afraid to believe you. The room seemed smaller. Jungkook stepped closer. What were you afraid of? That if I stayed, I'd eventually lose you. You lost me anyway. Jimin closed his eyes. I know. No. Jungkook's voice softened. You lost yourself too. Jimin looked at him. For a moment, neither moved. Then Jungkook noticed something beneath the old table. Wait. He crouched. A loose wooden panel covered a narrow compartment. He pulled it aside. Inside was a small metal box. Jimin's breathing stopped. I've never seen that. Jungkook lifted it. There was no lock. He opened it. Inside were dozens of photographs. Their rehearsals. Their birthdays. Their arguments. Their quiet moments. Photographs neither remembered taking. Jimin picked one up. It showed him asleep in a practice room. Another showed Jungkook sitting alone outside the building. Another showed the two of them laughing together. Then Jimin found something else. A folded document. He opened it. His face went pale. What? Jungkook took the paper. It was a schedule. Dates. Locations. Times. For 8 years. Almost every important moment in their lives had been documented. Jungkook stared at the pages. This isn't surveillance. Jimin looked at him. What is it? It's a record. A record of what? Every time we came close to finding each other. Jimin's eyes widened. At the bottom of the last page was a handwritten sentence. They keep choosing each other. Jimin sat down. His hands trembled. Someone has been watching us. Jungkook crouched beside him. For how long? Jimin stared at the paper. Since before we separated. A long silence followed. Then Jungkook noticed an envelope. His name was written on it. Not printed. Handwritten. He opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Jungkook standing outside the building 8 years earlier. Behind him stood someone else. Jungkook recognized the person immediately. His face hardened. No. Jimin looked over. Who is it? Jungkook turned the photograph around. Someone who told me you had abandoned me. Jimin stared at the image. The person in the photograph was the same person who had appeared in the old video. The same person who had stood in the room that night. The same person they had trusted. Jimin whispered his name. Then he looked at Jungkook. He lied to both of us. Jungkook folded the photographs. Why? I don't know. Then let's find out. Jimin nodded. But before they left, Jimin noticed something written on the inside of the metal box. A sentence almost hidden beneath years of dust. If you found this, it means you finally stopped running. Jimin stared at it. Then he smiled sadly. I think someone wanted us to find this. Jungkook looked at him. Maybe. Are you scared? Yes. Me too. Jungkook held out his hand. Jimin looked at it. Then took it. The gesture was simple. Quiet. But this time neither pretended it meant nothing. They left the building together. Outside, the sun was already beginning to disappear. The city was glowing beneath them. Cars moved through the streets. People laughed outside restaurants. Music drifted from a nearby cafe. Life continued as if nothing had happened. But for Jimin and Jungkook, everything had changed. They no longer had the luxury of pretending the past was buried. It wasn't. It had been waiting. And now they were ready to listen. That evening they sat on the hotel rooftop. No cameras. No staff. No stage. Just 2 cups of coffee slowly becoming cold between them. Jimin looked at Jungkook. Do you regret last night? Jungkook thought for a moment. No. Even after everything. No. Why? Jungkook looked at him. Because for the first time, I didn't let fear make the decision for me. Jimin smiled. I don't regret it either. The wind moved through his hair. Jungkook watched him quietly. Jimin. I don't know what happens next. Neither do I. But I know one thing. What? I don't want to lose you again. Jimin looked down. A tear slipped silently down his cheek. He wiped it away before Jungkook could mention it. But Jungkook saw. He always saw. He reached across the table. Their fingers touched. Jimin turned his hand over. Their palms met. Neither spoke. There was no dramatic confession. No audience. No flashing lights. No roaring stadium. Only silence. And somehow, that silence felt more honest than everything that had happened the night before. Jimin leaned back in his chair. Do you remember the promise? Jungkook smiled. The one about coming back. Yes, I remember. Jimin looked at the city. I think we're finally keeping it. Jungkook squeezed his hand. We are. For the first time in 8 years, Jimin allowed himself to believe that perhaps the story between them had never truly ended. Perhaps it had simply been interrupted. And perhaps the most important thing wasn't discovering who had betrayed them. Perhaps it was discovering that despite every lie, every separation, and every painful year, they had somehow continued choosing each other. Not loudly. Not publicly. But quietly. Again and again. Until one night, beneath thousands of lights, Jimin finally reached across the distance between them. And Jungkook reached back. The secret remained. The unanswered questions remained. The person who had manipulated their past was still somewhere beyond their sight. But for now, neither of them ran. They stayed. Together. And that was enough. At 2:13 in the morning, Jungkook's phone rang once, stopped, and displayed a photograph he had never seen before. He stared at the screen. For several seconds, he didn't breathe. The photograph showed the same abandoned rehearsal building, but this time the image had been taken from inside the room. Jimin was standing near the old table. Jungkook was beside him. And between them stood the person they had spent the last 24 hours trying to identify. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten sentence. "You're looking in the wrong place." Jungkook sat upright. The hotel room was dark, except for the pale light of the city spilling through the curtains. He immediately called Jimin. 1 ring. 2. 3. Jimin answered. "What's wrong?" "Check your phone." There was silence. Then Jimin whispered, "You got it too." Jungkook's stomach tightened. "Who sent it?" "I don't know." "Where are you?" "It's my room." "Stay there." "Jungkook." "I said stay there." He grabbed his jacket. By the time he reached Jimin's room, the door was already open. Jimin stood inside, holding his phone. His face was pale. "You came alone." "Yes. So did I." Jungkook looked around. Nothing appeared disturbed. He closed the door. "Show me." Jimin handed him the photograph. Jungkook examined every detail. The room. The old table. The cracked window. The shadows. And the third person. "Look at his hand," Jimin said. Jungkook zoomed in. A silver ring. Black stone. A thin scratch across its surface. Jungkook recognized it. "He still wears it." Jimin nodded. "You know where he is?" "No." Jimin walked toward the window. "He disappeared after the concert." "Did management find him?" "They said they couldn't." Jungkook frowned. "That's impossible." "I know." A notification appeared on Jimin's phone. Both looked down. Another photograph. This one showed the hotel. Their hotel. Taken from the opposite building. Jimin's hand tightened around the phone. "He's watching us." Jungkook stepped closer to the window. The city below was almost silent. A few cars moved through the streets. A neon sign flickered across the road. Nothing else. Then Jungkook noticed something. "Jimin." "What?" "The building opposite." Jimin followed his gaze. One window was illuminated. A figure stood behind the curtain. Watching them. Jimin's breath caught. "That's him." The light went out. Jungkook opened the door. "Don't." Jimin grabbed his arm. "It's a trap." "I know." "Then don't go." Jungkook looked at him. "You want to stay here?" "No." "Then come with me." Jimin hesitated. Then nodded. They took the service elevator. No security. No staff. No explanation. The elevator descended through the darkness of the hotel. Jimin leaned against the wall. "Why does this feel like that night?" Jungkook looked at him. "Because it is." "What do you mean?" "Someone wants us to repeat what happened 8 years ago." Jimin's eyes narrowed. "But why?" The elevator doors opened. Jungkook didn't answer. They stepped into the underground parking garage. The air smelled of concrete, oil, and rain. Their footsteps echoed between the pillars. A black car waited near the exit. Its headlights switched on. Jimin stopped. The car moved toward them. Jungkook pulled him aside. The vehicle passed. No one was inside. Jimin stared after it. What was that? Jungkook shook his head. I don't know. A phone began ringing. Not theirs. Somewhere nearby. They followed the sound. It came from beneath a parked car. Jungkook crouched and reached underneath. He pulled out an old phone. The screen displayed one message. Play me. Jimin stared. Don't. But Jungkook pressed the button. A recording began. Their younger voices filled the garage. Promise you'll come back. I promise. Then another voice interrupted. A voice neither had heard in years. You shouldn't make promises you can't keep. The recording ended. Jimin stepped backward. That voice. I know. It was him. Jungkook nodded. But that's not possible. Why? Because he wasn't there that night. Jungkook looked at him. How do you know? Because I remember. Jimin's face suddenly changed. No. What? I don't remember. Jungkook waited. Jimin closed his eyes. I remember the beginnings. And I remember you leaving. And I remember waking up the next morning. His voice trembled. But there's a missing hour. Jungkook stared at him. What missing hour? Jimin opened his eyes. The hour when everything changed. The garage seemed colder. Jungkook remembered something. A detail buried beneath years of confusion. A smell. Strong disinfectant. A ringing phone. A door closing. And someone saying his name. He pressed his fingers against his temple. I remember something too. Jimin stepped closer. What? You were crying. Jimin's eyes widened. I was. Yes. Why? I don't know. Jungkook looked at the phone. Maybe this recording does. He pressed play again. Static filled the garage. Then a whisper. If you're hearing this, you've already forgotten. Jimin covered his mouth. The recording continued. The memory was removed because remembering it would put you in danger. Jungkook's blood ran cold. Removed. A second voice appeared. You don't get to decide what they remember. The recording ended. Jimin stared at the phone. Who made this? Jungkook turned toward him. I think we did. What? Listen to the voices. Jimin replayed the recording. He heard his own voice. Then Jungkook's. Then the mysterious man. But beneath the static was another sound. A third recording. Someone breathing. Then a whisper. Don't trust the person closest to you. Jimin looked at Jungkook. Jungkook looked back. Neither spoke. Because suddenly the words felt like a weapon. They returned to the hotel before dawn. Neither slept. At 6, Jimin sat on the floor beside the window. Jungkook sat across from him. Between them lay the photographs, the phone, and the silver key. 3 objects. 3 pieces of a past that refused to stay buried. Jimin picked up the key. There has to be another lock. Jungkook nodded. The key opened the storage room. But it wasn't meant for that room. How do you know? Because the key was already inside. Jungkook stared at him. So whoever left it there wanted us to find it. Jungkook thought about the message. You're looking in the wrong place. He suddenly stood. The concert. Jimin looked up. What about it? The key wasn't meant for the old building. Then where? Jungkook looked toward the door. The stage. They returned to the venue that afternoon. The stadium was almost empty. The enormous stage that had looked magical the night before now seemed strangely ordinary. Technicians were dismantling lights. Workers were removing cables. Confetti still covered parts of the floor. Jimin walked slowly across the runway. This is where I dropped the key. Jungkook looked around. Did you feel anything unusual? Jimin frowned. No, think. Jimin closed his eyes. The music returned in his memory. The lights, the screaming, the heat. The moment his hand had touched Jungkook's wrist. Then something else. A vibration beneath the stage. Jimin opened his eyes. There, he pointed. A small metal panel was hidden beneath the edge of the platform. Jungkook crouched. The panel had a keyhole. The silver key fit perfectly. Click. A section of the stage unlocked. Jimin stared. What is this? Jungkook lifted the panel. Inside was a narrow compartment. There was another photograph. And a small audio recorder. Jimin picked up the photograph. His face went blank. It showed the two of them standing outside the rehearsal building. But this photograph had been taken before the night they remembered. On the back was a date. 8 years earlier. And beneath it, the night you think you met wasn't the first night. Jungkook looked at Jimin. What does that mean? Jimin shook his head. I don't know. But his expression said otherwise. Jimin. He stopped. A memory flashed through his mind. A rainy evening. A convenience store. A boy standing beneath an umbrella. A laugh. A pair of wet shoes. And a voice saying, You're Jimin, right? His heart began racing. Jungkook saw the change in his face. What did you remember? Jimin looked at him. You. Me. We met before. Jungkook stared. When? I don't know. The audio recorder suddenly activated. A voice emerged. This time it was unmistakably Jimin's. But older. Tired. Terrified. If you're listening to this, then the memory has returned. Jimin froze. His own recorded voice continued. You and Jungkook were separated because someone discovered what happened that night. Jungkook's breathing stopped. What happened? The recording continued. You weren't supposed to survive it. Jimin covered his mouth. Jungkook reached for his hand. The voice continued. And the person who caused it has been beside you ever since. The recording stopped. Neither moved. Then the stadium lights suddenly switched off. Darkness swallowed the stage. Jimin's fingers tightened around Jungkook's. A single spotlight turned on. At the center of the empty stage stood the man from the photograph. The silver ring gleamed on his hand. He looked at them calmly. You finally remembered. Jungkook stepped forward. What happened 8 years ago? The man smiled. You really want to know? Jimin stood beside Jungkook. Yes. The man's expression changed. For the first time he looked afraid. Then you should know something first. What? He looked directly at Jimin. You were the one who asked me to erase your memory. Jimin went completely still. Jungkook turned toward him. Jimin. The man took one step backward. And you asked me to make Jungkook believe you had abandoned him. Jungkook's face hardened. Why would he do that? The man looked at both of them. Because 8 years ago, Jimin discovered the truth. What truth? The man's eyes shifted toward the empty seats. The truth about why you were being watched. Jimin whispered who was watching us. The man didn't answer. Instead, he said quietly, the person who ordered me to erase your memories was never your enemy. Jungkook's stomach dropped. Then who? The man looked at them with an expression filled with regret. Someone you loved. The stage fell silent. Jimin looked at Jungkook. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Neither knew what to say. But for the first time, they understood that the mystery was much larger than a broken friendship or a forgotten promise. Someone had spent 8 years controlling what they remembered. Someone had protected a secret powerful enough to destroy everything they knew. And somewhere beyond the empty stadium, that person was still watching. Jimin slowly reached for Jungkook's hand. This time Jungkook didn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwined. Whatever truth waited for them, they would face it together. The man watched them quietly. Then he whispered the words that made Jimin's heart stop. "You have no idea what happened to the third person that night." Jungkook looked up. "Third person?" The man nodded. "There were 3 of you." Jimin's face went pale. And suddenly a memory surfaced. A child's voice. A locked door. Rain against glass. And someone screaming his name. Jimin closed his eyes. The memory was finally returning. But it wasn't complete. And the missing piece was the one thing he feared most. Because somewhere inside that forgotten night was the reason he had chosen to lose Jungkook. And the reason he had never been able to forgive himself. Jimin's knees nearly gave way when the memory finally broke through. A child's voice. A slammed door. Rain striking a window. And Jungkook screaming his name. He gripped Jungkook's hand so tightly that their fingers hurt. "Jimin, I remember the rooms." The man standing beneath the spotlight said nothing. Jungkook moved closer. "What room?" Jimin swallowed. "The room beneath the rehearsal building." There was no room beneath it. There was. Jimin's breathing became uneven. "I've seen it." The man finally spoke. "You haven't seen it." Jimin looked at him. "You've remembered it." The distinction made the room feel colder. Jungkook turned toward the man. "Who was the third person?" The man looked away. "You're not ready." Jungkook's voice hardened. "We've been told that for 8 years. You don't understand." "Then explain." The man stepped out of the spotlight. "Your memories weren't erased because someone wanted to hurt you." "Then why?" "Because one of you begged me to do it." Jimin closed his eyes. "I did." Jungkook looked at him. "You asked him?" "Yes." "Why?" Jimin struggled to speak. "Because I thought it would save you." Jungkook's expression tightened. "You always say that." "I know. But you never tell me what I needed saving from." Jimin looked at the man. "Tell him." The man shook his head. "You tell him." Jimin stared at the floor. Then he whispered it started with a letter. The memory returned. Not all at once. Piece by piece. 8 years earlier. Jimin had been alone in the rehearsal room when he found an envelope beneath the door. There was no name. No return address. Only 3 words. "Leave him alone." He had laughed at first. He thought it was a prank. Then the second letter arrived. Then the third. The messages became increasingly specific. They knew where he went. They knew where Jungkook went. They knew things nobody outside their small circle should have known. Then one night, Jimin received a photograph. It showed Jungkook walking home alone. On the back was written, "Next time he won't walk home." Jimin remembered running. He remembered calling Jungkook. No answer. He remembered rain. So much rain. And then the old building. He found Jungkook there. But Jungkook wasn't alone. Someone else was standing beside him. A third person. Someone Jimin had trusted. Someone who had been crying. Jimin opened his eyes. The third person wasn't a stranger. Jungkook looked at him. Who was it? Jimin couldn't answer. The man did. It was someone who believed they were protecting you. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. That's not a name. No. Then give me one. The man sighed. You already know it. Jungkook froze. A familiar name formed in his mind. Someone who had disappeared from their lives soon after the incident. Someone they had both assumed had simply moved away. Someone whose messages stopped arriving without explanation. Jungkook whispered the name. Jimin nodded. Yes. The realization hit him like a physical blow. No. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. I thought they were gone. They weren't. Where are they? The man looked toward the stage entrance. Closer than you think. Jungkook immediately turned. But the doorway was empty. He ran toward it. Jimin followed. The corridor beyond the stage was dark. They searched room after room. Nothing. Then Jungkook noticed a white envelope resting on the floor. His name was written across it. He opened it. Inside was a single sentence. I never left. Beneath it was an address. Jimin read it over his shoulder. His face changed. I know this place. Where? The house where we made the first promise. Jungkook stared at him. You mean, Yes. The abandoned house stood outside the city. They arrived just before sunset. The sky was bruised purple. Wind moved through the tall grass surrounding the property. The house looked abandoned. Its windows were dusty. The front door hung slightly open. Jungkook pushed it. The hinges groaned. Inside, the smell of damp wood filled the air. Jimin walked slowly. This is where I first found the key. Jungkook looked around. I thought it was the rehearsal building. So did I. Then why do I remember this place? Because you were here. Jungkook stared at him. When? Before we knew each other. The words unsettled him. He walked toward the staircase. Something about the house felt familiar. A creaking floorboard. A narrow window. A small crack in the wall. Then he saw it. A photograph pinned to the wall. It showed 3 children. Jimin, Jungkook, and the person they had spent 8 years believing had disappeared. Jungkook stepped closer. His hand trembled. We knew each other. Jimin nodded. As children. How? I don't remember. You do. Jimin looked away. I remember pieces. Tell me. You were afraid of thunderstorms. Jungkook blinked. What? You used to hide under tables when it rained. A strange smile appeared on his face. I did. Yes. What else? You hated carrots. Jungkook laughed despite himself. I still do. Jimin smiled. Then his expression faded. And you had a habit of holding someone's sleeve when you were scared. Jungkook looked at him. Whose sleeve? Jimin didn't answer. He didn't need to. Jungkook understood. The memories were returning. Not just the night 8 years ago. Everything before it. They had known each other much longer than they realized. They had been separated once. Then reunited. Then separated again. Someone had manipulated both events. Jungkook touched the photograph. Why did we forget? A voice came from behind them. Because remembering would have changed everything. They turned. The third person stood in the doorway. Older now. Tired. But unmistakable. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. You're alive. The person smiled sadly. I never died. Jungkook stepped forward. Then why did you disappear? Because I was told to. By whom? A pause. By someone who knew everything. Jimin whispered who. The third person looked at him. You. Jimin froze. What? You were the one who asked me to disappear. Jungkook turned toward Jimin. Is that true? Jimin couldn't speak. The third person continued. You were convinced that if Jungkook believed you hated him, he'd stop looking for you. I was trying to protect him. You were trying to protect everyone. Jimin lowered his head. And I failed. No. The third person stepped closer. You survived. Jungkook's voice was quiet. What happened that night? The third person looked at both of them. Someone came to the house. Who? I never saw their face. What did they want? You. Jungkook's expression tightened. Why me? Because you had something. What? A recording. Jimin's face changed. The recording. Yes. The one we found. No. The third person shook their head. The original. Jungkook felt a chill move down his spine. Where is it? Hidden. Where? The third person pointed toward the basement. Jimin immediately grabbed Jungkook's hand. They descended the narrow stairs. Each step creaked beneath their weight. At the bottom was a small room. A single metal cabinet stood against the wall. Jungkook approached it. There was no lock. Inside was an old cassette recorder. And beside it a handwritten note. Jimin picked it up. His hands shook. The note contained only one sentence. Listen to the whole thing this time. Jungkook pressed play. Static. Rain. Footsteps. Then their younger voices. Are you sure? Yes. Then we have to tell someone. No. Why? Because they're listening. A third voice appeared. I told you to stop. Jungkook stopped breathing. He knew that voice. So did Jimin. It belonged to someone they had trusted completely. Someone who had never seemed capable of betrayal. The recording continued. You don't understand what you're involved in. Young Jungkook answered. Then explain. A chair scraped across the floor. Then came the sentence that changed everything. If they find out what you recorded, they won't just separate you. A pause. They'll erase you. The recording stopped. Jungkook stared at the machine. What did we record? The third person shook their head. We never found out. Jimin looked at them. You're lying. No. You know. I know what happened afterward. What? The person looked at Jungkook. You were given a choice. What choice? You could keep the recording and risk everyone around you. A pause. Or you could destroy it and forget. Jungkook stared at him. I chose to forget. Yes. And Jimin. You chose to make me forget too. Jimin covered his face. I thought I was saving you. Jungkook approached him. You were trying. Jimin lowered his hands. I hurt you. Yes. I destroyed 8 years. Yes. I don't deserve. Jungkook interrupted him. Don't finish that sentence. Jimin looked at him. Why? Because I don't want you to turn this into another punishment. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. Jungkook gently touched his shoulder. We've lost enough time. The third person watched them quietly. Then they spoke. There is one more thing. Jungkook turned. What? The person who ordered all of this knows you're here. Jimin's face tightened. How? They always know. The lights suddenly went out. Jungkook instinctively reached for Jimin. The basement fell into darkness. Then a phone rang. Not theirs. The sound came from inside the metal cabinet. Jungkook opened it. A phone was vibrating beneath the recorder. He answered. For several seconds there was only static. Then a familiar voice spoke. You should have left the past alone. Jungkook's blood ran cold. Who are you? A quiet laugh. You already know. The line went dead. Jimin stared at Jungkook. Who was it? Jungkook slowly lowered the phone. His face had gone pale. I know that voice. Who? Jungkook looked toward the stairs. The person who was with us 8 years ago. The third person whispered. That's impossible. Why? Because they were the one who told us they were protecting you. Jungkook's eyes hardened. And now they're coming back. Jimin stepped closer. For the first time, there was no hesitation in his voice. Then let them come. Jungkook looked at him. Jimin held out his hand. Jungkook took it. They climbed the stairs together. Outside, the last light of evening had disappeared. The house stood silently beneath the darkening sky. Neither knew what the next day would bring. But for the first time, they weren't afraid of discovering the truth. They were afraid of what the truth might demand from them. And as they walked away from the house, Jimin looked back once. A light had appeared in the upstairs window. Someone was standing behind the glass, watching them leave. Jimin stopped. Jungkook turned. What is it? Jimin stared at the window. Nothing. He took Jungkook's hand again. And together they continued walking. Behind them the figure disappeared. But the light remained. And somewhere inside the house, the old cassette recorder began playing by itself. A young voice whispered through the darkness. Don't trust him. Then another voice answered. You're too late. The house disappeared behind them as the first drops of rain began to fall. Neither Jimin nor Jungkook spoke during the drive back to the city. The windshield wipers moved steadily across the glass, cutting the darkness into rhythmic pieces. Left, right, left, right. Jungkook kept both hands on the steering wheel. Jimin sat beside him, staring through the window. Between them rested the old cassette recorder. Neither had touched it since leaving the house. The voice from the recording continued to echo inside Jimin's mind. Don't trust him. Then another voice. You're too late. He closed his eyes. Jungkook. Do you remember the first time you saw me? Jungkook was quiet for a moment. I remember the rehearsal room. That wasn't the first time. I know. Jimin turned toward him. You remember? Not clearly. What do you remember? Jungkook's eyes remained on the road. A rainy afternoon. Jimin's heart skipped. You were sitting outside a convenience store. Jimin slowly smiled. You were holding an umbrella. No. Jungkook shook his head. I wasn't. You were. I was standing under the roof because I didn't have one. Jimin laughed softly. You were soaked. So were you. You gave me your jacket. I didn't. You did. I think you're remembering it wrong. Jimin smiled. No, I'm not. For a moment, the mystery disappeared. There were no threats. No hidden recordings. No locked rooms. Only two people remembering a childhood moment neither had realized they shared. Then Jungkook spoke. You were crying. Jimin's smile vanished. I was. Yes. Why? I don't remember. Jimin looked down. I think I do. What? My parents had argued. Jungkook nodded slowly. And you told me something. What did I say? You said you wished you could disappear. Jimin's fingers tightened. I said that. Yes. What did you tell me? Jungkook smiled faintly. I told you that disappearing was stupid. Jimin laughed. That sounds like you. You asked me what you should do instead. And I told you to stay. Jimin looked at him. You don't remember what happened next. Jungkook shook his head. You gave me half your snack. Jimin smiled. I hated that snack. You ate it anyway. Because you wouldn't stop staring at me. You looked hungry. I was embarrassed. You were always embarrassed. Jimin looked out the window. So we really met before? Yes. Then why did we forget? Jungkook didn't answer. Because both knew the answer wasn't in childhood. It was in the years that followed. When their friendship became something deeper. When someone noticed. When someone became afraid. When someone decided that forgetting would be safer than remembering. The hotel was quiet when they arrived. They went directly to Jimin's room. He placed the cassette recorder on the table. Jungkook inserted the tape. The first recording began. Rain. Footsteps. Their younger voices. Then the mysterious voice. You don't understand what you're involved in. Young Jungkook replied. Then explain. The voice became quieter. There are people watching you. Jimin's younger voice asked why. Because of the recording. What recording? Silence. Then Jungkook's younger voice said. The one from the meeting. Jimin stopped the tape. The meeting. Jungkook stared at him. What meeting? I don't know. Maybe we recorded something without realizing it. Jimin restarted the tape. The conversation continued. We should tell someone. No. Why? Because the person we're supposed to trust is the person we're recording. Jungkook's face changed. Wait. He rewound the tape. Again. 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 The sentence remained clear. The person we're supposed to trust is the person we're recording. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Who were we talking about? I don't know. Think. I've tried. Try harder. Jimin closed his eyes. He listened to the rain on the recording. Then he heard something beneath it. A bell. 3 times. Jimin opened his eyes. That sound. What? The bell. Jungkook listened. 3 soft chimes. He recognized it. The old studio. Jimin nodded. The recording was made there. They searched through old files until they found a floor plan of the building. The studio had been renovated years earlier. But the original structure remained. There was one room marked on the blueprint that neither had remembered. Archive Room B. Jungkook stared at it. That room doesn't exist anymore. Maybe that's why we forgot. They went there before dawn. The old studio smelled of dust, wood, and old electrical equipment. A security guard let them inside after a brief call from management. Jimin walked down the hallway. His footsteps became slower as they approached the archive room. Something inside him recognized the place. He touched the wall. Here. Jungkook looked at him. What? There was a door. Where? Jimin pointed. The wall had been painted over. Jungkook ran his fingers across it. There was a faint outline. He found a maintenance panel nearby. Behind it was an old handle. Together they pulled. The hidden door opened. A cloud of dust rose into the air. Jimin coughed. Jungkook covered his mouth with his sleeve. Inside was a small archive room. Old tapes lined the shelves. Boxes covered the floor. And on the wall was a calendar from 8 years ago. One date had been circled. The night they had forgotten. Jungkook walked toward it. That's the night. Jimin nodded. A small recorder sat beneath the calendar. Jungkook picked it up. There was a label. J&J final recording. Jimin's hands began to shake. This is it. They pressed play. At first they heard themselves laughing. Young. Carefree. Then the recording changed. A door opened. Someone entered. The mysterious third person spoke. You shouldn't have recorded that meeting. Young Jimin answered. We didn't mean to. You need to destroy it. Young Jungkook asked. What did we record? Silence. Then the third person said. Evidence. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. Evidence of what? The answer came quietly. Someone has been manipulating the people around you. Jimin looked at Jungkook. The recording continued. Who? The third person hesitated. Then, the person who controls your contracts. Jungkook stopped the recording. The room went silent. Jimin stared at him. Management. Not necessarily. The person behind the contracts. Someone with influence. They continued listening. The third person explained that a powerful individual had been secretly controlling opportunities, relationships, and information surrounding them. Not because of jealousy. Because of money. Because their careers had become valuable. Because certain people had learned that keeping two young performers dependent and isolated was profitable. The recording wasn't about romance. It was about control. The person had manipulated schedules, intercepted messages, created misunderstandings, separated people who might expose the truth. And when Jimin and Jungkook discovered evidence, someone had tried to make the evidence disappear. Jungkook's jaw tightened. So that's why. Jimin nodded. They wanted us apart because together we asked too many questions. The recording continued. Young Jimin whispered. What happens if we tell someone? The third person answered. They'll destroy you. Young Jungkook asked. Then what do we do? A long silence. Then Jimin's younger voice spoke. We forget. Jungkook stopped the tape. No. Jimin looked at him. You said it. I know. Why? I don't know. Listen. Jimin restarted the tape. Young Jimin continued. If we forget, they won't know what we know. Young Jungkook said. But what about us? I'll make sure we find each other again. The third person objected. You can't guarantee that. Young Jimin answered. I can guarantee that I'll remember one thing. What? His face. Jungkook's breathing caught. The recording continued. I may forget everything else. A pause. But I won't forget him. The tape clicked. Silence. Jimin covered his mouth. Tears filled his eyes. Jungkook stared at him. You remembered. Jimin nodded. That was the promise. What promise? That no matter what happened, I'd find you again. Jungkook stepped toward him. And you did. Jimin laughed through his tears. Eventually. Jungkook gently wiped a tear from his cheek. You shouldn't have had to wait 8 years. I know. But you came back. I always wanted to. Then why didn't you? Because I was afraid that remembering would put you in danger. Jungkook looked at the old recorder. And now I'm more afraid of losing you again. The words settled between them. Jungkook reached for his hand. You won't. Jimin looked at their intertwined fingers. How can you promise that? Because I'm not 16 anymore. Jimin smiled. And I'm not letting anyone decide what I remember. For the first time, Jimin believed him. They spent the rest of the morning copying the old recordings. By noon, they had enough evidence to prove that their separation had been manipulated. Not every mystery was solved. They still didn't know who had orchestrated everything. They still didn't know why the third person had obeyed. But they finally understood the most important part. Jimin hadn't abandoned Jungkook. Jungkook hadn't betrayed Jimin. Their friendship hadn't ended naturally. Someone had forced distance between them, and the two of them had been manipulated into believing the lie. Later that evening, they sat on the empty concert stage. The same stage where everything had started. Jimin looked at the rows of empty seats. "Do you regret what you did last night?" Jungkook smiled. "No, even knowing everything. Especially knowing everything." Jimin looked at him. "Why?" "Because I finally chose you in front of everyone." Jimin's eyes softened. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." Jimin looked down. The silver key rested in his palm. He held it out. "Take it." Jungkook shook his head. "No." "Why?" "You keep it." Again. "Yes." Jimin smiled. "Why?" "Because this time I want you to know where it is." He closed Jimin's fingers around the key. "And I want you to stop carrying it alone." Jimin looked at him for several seconds. Then he leaned his head against Jungkook's shoulder. Neither spoke. The empty stadium no longer felt frightening. It felt peaceful. The stage lights were off. The seats were empty. There was no applause. No cameras. No expectations. Just the quiet sound of two people breathing beside each other. Jimin whispered, "Do you think we'll ever know everything?" Jungkook thought about it. "Maybe not." "Does that bother you?" "Sometimes." "And now?" Jungkook looked at him. "Now I know enough." "Enough for what?" "To stop being afraid." Jimin smiled. Outside, rain began falling against the stadium roof. The same sound from the recording. The same sound from their forgotten night. But this time neither of them ran. Jimin closed his eyes. Jungkook stayed beside him. The past had finally given them back the truth they had been denied. It had been painful. It had been unfair. It had taken 8 years. But it had also taught them something neither could have understood when they were younger. Some relationships don't survive because they are perfect. They survive because, even after everything breaks, two people continue choosing to repair them. Jimin opened his eyes. "Jungkook. If you could go back to that night, would you still choose to forget?" Jungkook thought carefully. "No." "Why?" "Because I would rather remember the pain than forget you." Jimin's eyes filled with tears. He looked away. Jungkook smiled. "You." Jimin looked at the silver key. Then at him. "No." "Why?" "Because now I know something." "What?" "You can't erase someone you truly love." The words were quiet. But they carried everything. The years apart. The letters. The photographs. The locked room. The concert. The key. The fear. And the promise. Jungkook reached for Jimin's hand. This time there was no hesitation. Their fingers intertwined. The stadium remained silent around them. And for once, silence wasn't a sign of something missing. It was proof that they had finally found peace. The mystery wasn't completely gone. Some names remained unanswered. Some motives remained buried. Some memories still had edges too painful to touch. But the most important truth had returned. They had never stopped choosing each other. They had only forgotten that they had. And now that they remembered, neither intended to forget again. The first thing Jimin noticed the next morning was the silence. No cameras. No reporters. No ringing phones. No frantic voices from management. Just sunlight slipping through the curtains and the quiet hum of the city waking below. For the first time in years, he woke without feeling as though someone was waiting for him to make a mistake. Then he remembered. The concert. The key. The recording. Jungkook. Jimin sat up. His heart immediately began beating faster. Not from fear. From realization. Everything had changed. He reached into his pocket and felt the silver key. It was still there. He smiled. Then his phone vibrated. One message. From Jungkook. Come downstairs, I found something. Jimin's smile disappeared. He quickly got dressed. When he reached the lobby, Jungkook was standing near the glass doors with 2 coffees. You look worried, Jungkook said. I am. I haven't even told you what I found. That makes it worse. Jungkook handed him a cup. Drink first. Jimin accepted it. What did you find? Jungkook glanced toward the entrance. Someone accessed the old archive last night. Jimin's fingers tightened around the cup. Who? We don't know. Then how do you know? Jungkook pulled out his phone. A security image appeared. The photograph showed a person entering the studio shortly after midnight. The face was hidden, but the clothing was familiar. Jimin stared. That jacket. You recognize it? Yes. Whose? Jimin swallowed. The third person's. Jungkook's expression hardened. He was supposed to be gone. He said he never left. Then why did he return to the archive? Jimin looked at the photograph again. Maybe he wasn't looking for the recording. What else is there? Jimin's mind returned to the hidden room. The boxes, the tapes, the old calendar. Then he remembered something. There was a drawer we didn't open. Jungkook looked at him. Where? Behind the cabinet. They returned to the studio. The archive room was exactly as they had left it. Dust floated through the narrow beam of sunlight. The old shelves stood untouched. Or appeared untouched. Jungkook moved the cabinet. Behind it was a shallow wooden drawer. Jimin pulled it open. Inside was a small envelope. No name. No date. Only a symbol drawn in black ink. A circle crossed by a single line. Jungkook stared at it. Do you know that symbol? Jimin shook his head. No, but something about it felt familiar. He opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. This time there were 4 people. Jimin, Jungkook, the third person, and someone else. A woman stood behind them. Her face had been carefully scratched out. Jungkook stared at the photograph. Who is she? Jimin couldn't answer. The image triggered something deep inside him. A room. A woman's voice. A hand resting on his shoulder. A sentence spoken softly. You must never tell him. Jimin dropped the photograph. Jungkook caught it. Jimin. I know her. How? I don't know. You just said you did. I remember her voice. Jungkook looked at the photographs. Whose voice? Jimin closed his eyes. She told me to forget. The room became silent. Jungkook's expression changed. Was she the one who ordered the memory loss? I don't know. Then we find out. They searched the archive for hours. They found contracts, old schedules, letters, photographs, names of people who had worked around them. But nothing directly identified the woman. Then Jimin found an old notebook. The first pages were blank. The middle pages contained lists of dates. The final page had a sentence. The 4th person knows why they were chosen. Jungkook stared. Chosen. Jimin shook his head. I don't understand. What if this wasn't about separating us? What do you mean? What if someone brought us together deliberately? Jimin looked at him. The possibility was terrifying. You think our meeting wasn't an accident? I think someone wanted us to meet. Jimin's heart sank. All those memories could have been planned. They sat in silence. For years, Jimin had believed their friendship had been something spontaneous. Something beautiful because it had happened naturally. Now he had to consider the possibility that even the beginning had been manipulated. Jungkook noticed his expression. Hey, Jimin looked at him. Don't let them take that from you. What we had? Jimin looked away. What if none of it was real? Jungkook stepped closer. Look at me. Jimin did. What happened between us was real. How do you know? Because nobody could have scripted the way you looked at me when you were scared. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. Or the way you held my hand when I couldn't stop shaking. Jungkook smiled faintly. Or the fact that you still hate carrots. Jimin laughed through his tears. You really remember everything. Not everything. Jungkook touched his chest. Just the important things. The moment was interrupted by a loud crash. Both turned. A shelf had fallen. Jungkook immediately moved in front of Jimin. Stay behind me. Jungkook. Please. They waited. Nothing. Then a small object rolled from beneath the fallen shelf. A USB drive. Jimin picked it up. A label was attached. For the one who remembers. Jungkook looked at him. That's you. Maybe. They found an old computer in the archive. It took several attempts to start. The USB contained a single video. The file date was 8 years old. Jimin pressed play. The screen showed the woman from the photograph. Her face was visible this time. Jimin gasped. Jungkook stared. They knew her. She had been close to them. Someone who had always seemed kind. Someone who had often comforted them. Someone who had been present during the hardest years. Jimin whispered her name. No. The woman looked directly into the camera. If you're watching this, then the plan failed. Jungkook leaned closer. What plan? The woman continued. I never wanted you to forget each other. Jimin's eyes widened. I wanted you to survive. She took a breath. The person controlling your lives had discovered what you knew. Jungkook clenched his fists. So she helped us. The woman nodded on the recording. I had to make it look as though Jimin betrayed Jungkook. Jimin's breathing stopped. But I didn't erase everything. She touched her hand to the table. I left fragments. The photographs. The key. The recordings. The memories. Everything they had found had been deliberately scattered. Not to confuse them. To lead them back. Jungkook stared at the screen. Why? The woman's eyes filled with tears. Because I knew one day you would be strong enough to handle the truth. The video continued. There is one final piece. Jimin whispered, what? The woman looked directly into the camera. The original recording was never destroyed. Jungkook's eyes widened. Where? Her answer came softly. Inside the place where you first promised to find each other. Jimin immediately understood. The house. The woman nodded. But don't go there alone. The screen went black. Jungkook looked at Jimin. We're going. Yes. You're not afraid. I am. Jungkook smiled. So am I. They left the studio before sunset. The drive to the house was quiet. Neither spoke much. There was something different now. They weren't chasing memories anymore. They were chasing the truth behind them. When they arrived, the house looked exactly as they had left it. The grass moved in the wind. The windows reflected the darkening sky. Jimin opened the door. Inside, the air was colder than before. They went straight to the basement. The metal cabinet was still there. Jungkook searched behind it. Nothing. Then Jimin noticed the floor. One wooden plank was slightly raised. He knelt. This. Together they lifted it. Beneath it was a small metal case. The original recording. Jungkook stared at it. This is everything. Jimin nodded. Play it. Jungkook inserted the tape. Static filled the basement. Then their younger voices appeared. But this time they heard something they had never heard before. The third person was crying. I don't want to do this. Young Jimin answered. Then don't. I have no choice. Young Jungkook asked. Who is forcing you? Silence. Then the woman appeared in the recording. Me. Jimin froze. The woman's voice continued. I need you to trust me. Young Jungkook asked. Why? Because someone is listening. Then came a sound. A door opening. Someone entering. Jimin heard his younger voice. It's them. The recording became chaotic. A struggle. A chair falling. Jungkook shouting. Jimin crying. Then the mysterious voice. You have 10 seconds. The woman shouted. Run. Footsteps. A crash. Then silence. Jungkook stopped the recording. His hands were shaking. What happened? Jimin looked at him. We were attacked. Yes. And she helped us. Yes. But why did we forget? Jimin looked down. Because something happened after the attack. He pressed play again. The final seconds revealed the missing truth. Jimin's younger voice whispered. If we remember this, they'll come after him. The woman answered. Then forget. Young Jimin began crying. But what about us? You'll find each other again. Jimin whispered. How? The woman answered. Because some promises are stronger than memory. The recording ended. Jungkook stared into the darkness. For several seconds he couldn't speak. Then he looked at Jimin. You really believed you'd find me again? Jimin nodded. I did. You never stopped believing. No. Jungkook stepped closer. Even after 8 years. Every day. Jungkook pulled him into a quiet embrace. Jimin closed his eyes. For once there was no fear in the gesture. Only relief. The mystery had not disappeared. But its center had changed. They finally understood that the people who had separated them had not all been enemies. Some had lied to protect them. Some had sacrificed themselves. Some had made terrible choices because they believed there was no other way. And some had used fear as a weapon. The difference between them was finally becoming clear. Jungkook whispered, we finish this together. Jimin nodded against his shoulder. Together. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Rain began falling heavily. But neither moved. They stayed there, holding on to the one thing no one had managed to erase. Trust. And when the rain finally softened, Jimin looked at Jungkook and smiled. We came back. Jungkook smiled back. Yes. Just like we promised. He took Jimin's hand. This time there was no locked door between them. No hidden rooms. No erased memory. No lie strong enough to separate them. Only the truth. And for the first time, the truth felt like freedom. The rain stopped just before sunrise. Jimin stood on the porch of the old house, watching droplets slide from the roof and disappear into the wet grass. Beside him, Jungkook held the original recording. For years, they had believed the past was something they needed to escape. Now they understood that it was something they needed to accept. Not every memory had returned. Not every question had been answered. But they finally knew the most important truth. They had never abandoned each other. They had been separated by fear, manipulated by people who believed they were protecting them, and forced to forget pieces of their own story. Yet somehow, through every lie, they had continued finding their way back. Jungkook stepped beside Jimin. Are you ready? Jimin looked at him. For what? To leave this place. Jimin glanced toward the house. The old walls. The broken windows. The room where they had hidden their memories. He smiled softly. Yes. They walked toward the car. Before getting inside, Jimin stopped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver key. For a moment he studied it. 8 years of fear seemed to live inside that tiny piece of metal. Then he placed it in Jungkook's hand. Keep it. Jungkook looked surprised. Why? Because I don't need it anymore. What if we need to open another door? Jimin smiled. Then we'll find another key. Jungkook closed his fingers around it. Together. The drive back to the city felt different. The same roads passed outside the window. The same buildings. The same morning traffic. But neither of them felt trapped by yesterday anymore. When they returned to the stadium, the place was almost empty. The enormous stage was still standing. The lights were off. Confetti remained scattered across the floor like tiny pieces of gold. Jimin walked to the center of the stage. This is where everything changed. Jungkook joined him. No, Jimin looked at him. This is where everything became visible. Jungkook smiled. You're right. They stood silently beneath the empty lights. No audience. No cameras. No roaring music. Yet Jimin remembered the night perfectly. The moment he had dropped to his knees. The shocked expression on Jungkook's face. The silver key. The giant screen. The old photographs. The secret finally beginning to crack open. Everyone had thought the unforgettable moment was what Jimin had done on stage. But Jimin knew the real meaning of it. He hadn't been making a spectacle. He had been making a promise. A promise that said, I remember you. I found you. I'm not running anymore. Jungkook seemed to understand without being told. He reached for Jimin's hand. Jimin held it. You know what I realized? Jungkook asked. What? We spent so much time trying to recover the past that we forgot we could create something new. Jimin smiled. That's probably the first wise thing you've said all week. Jungkook laughed. Seriously. Their laughter echoed through the empty stadium. It was ordinary, simple, and somehow more beautiful than the loudest applause. Later that evening, they returned to the stage for one final rehearsal. The lights came on one by one. The empty seats slowly disappeared beneath the glow. Music filled the stadium. Jimin stood at one end of the runway. Jungkook stood at the other. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then the music began. They performed the song they had written years earlier but never finished. The melody was gentle. The lyrics spoke of losing time, finding courage, and recognizing someone even after memory had faded. When the final note ended, the stadium became completely silent. Jimin looked at Jungkook. Neither needed to say anything. The song had said enough. The following weeks were difficult. Questions came. Rumors spread. Old documents were investigated. People who had manipulated their past were finally confronted. Some truths were painful. Some were disappointing. Some names never received a complete explanation. But Jimin and Jungkook stopped trying to force every unanswered question into a perfect ending. They had learned something more important. Closure didn't always mean knowing everything. Sometimes it meant knowing enough to move forward. Months later, another concert filled the same stadium. This time, the atmosphere was different. The stage was brighter. The music was louder. The audience was enormous. Jimin stood beside Jungkook beneath thousands of lights. For a second, he remembered the night everything had begun. Jungkook leaned toward him. Nervous. A little. Why? Because I remember what happened last time. Jungkook smiled. Don't worry. Why? You're not alone. Jimin looked at him. Those 4 words were enough. The music started. They performed. They laughed. They moved across the stage beneath a sky of artificial stars. And when the final song ended, the audience erupted. Jimin looked toward Jungkook. He didn't need a dramatic gesture this time. He didn't need a secret key. He didn't need an old photograph. He simply reached for Jungkook's hand. Jungkook took it. The stadium exploded with applause. But this time the sound didn't frighten them. It felt like freedom. When they finally walked backstage, Jimin stopped beside the mirror. He looked at his reflection. 8 years ago, he had been terrified of losing someone. For years, he had believed love meant protecting another person from the truth. Now he understood something different. Love wasn't deciding what someone was allowed to know. It wasn't sacrificing yourself in silence. It wasn't disappearing to keep someone safe. Sometimes love was simply staying, telling the truth, and allowing another person to choose whether they wanted to stay too. Jungkook appeared behind him. What are you thinking? Jimin smiled at their reflection. That we wasted a lot of time. Jungkook nodded. We did. Do you regret it? Jungkook shook his head. I regret the pains. He paused. But I don't regret finding you again. Jimin turned toward him. You'd do it all over. Jungkook smiled. Every time. Jimin laughed softly. Even the 8 years. No. Jungkook took his hand. I'd find you sooner. They stood there for a moment. Then Jimin pulled the silver key from his pocket. Jungkook stared. You still have it. I lied. You said you gave it to me. I gave you another one. Jungkook laughed. You're impossible. I know. Jimin looked at the key one last time. Then he placed it inside a small wooden box. Not hidden. Not locked. Just resting there. A reminder of everything they had survived. Jungkook closed the box. Ready? Jimin nodded. For what? For tomorrow. Jimin smiled. Together. Always. They walked out of the room. Behind them, the box remained on the table. The silver key reflected the soft light. The past was still there. But it no longer controlled them. And perhaps that was the real ending. Not forgetting. Not erasing. Not pretending the pain never happened. But remembering everything and choosing happiness anyway. Years later, people would still talk about that spectacular concert. They would remember the enormous stage. The golden confetti. The flames. The thousands of lights. And most of all, the moment Jimin dropped to his knees in front of Jungkook and stunned an entire stadium. People would create theories about what it meant. Some would call it romantic. Some would call it dramatic. Some would insist they had witnessed something extraordinary. They would never know the whole story. They didn't need to. Because the truth belonged to Jimin and Jungkook. The truth was that behind all the lights and applause were 2 people who had once lost each other. 2 people who had been separated by fear. 2 people who had forgotten pieces of their own past. And 2 people who somehow found their way back. Not because fate made it easy. Not because the past suddenly became painless. But because, when given the chance to walk away again, they chose to stay. The silver key never opened another locked room. It didn't have to. Its purpose had already been fulfilled. It had led them back to the truth. And the truth had led them back to each other. As the final lights of the stadium faded into darkness, Jimin's voice echoed softly through the empty hallway. Do you remember our promise? Jungkook smiled. I remember. What was it? Jungkook squeezed his hand. Come back. Jimin smiled. I did. Jungkook looked at him. So did I. And together they walked toward the morning light. This time neither of them looked back.